All right. We are live a little bit later than expected, but here we are. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 15 today as we continue our discipleship series, our sessions of walking through the scripture, and we're talking through the different ways and the implications of different things of how we interact with the Bible. And my co-leader here is coming eventually at some point. Your Bible's up here on your chair. And as we get started, kind of want to do a basic recap because it's hard. It's impossible for us to continue to walk through this without just continuing. But it's also challenging as people join in to not have some type of recap because, well, there's a lot of information. And you're like, well, it's just 14 chapters. Yeah, it is 14 chapters. But it's only taken us 8 or 9 weeks to get through those 14 chapters. No big deal. So we started out with creation story. There have been a couple of retellings of the creation story and the call of God to trust Him, to trust the story, to trust His leadership. And this word that is used for God is quite literally translated what?
Talking about Yahweh?
Not Yahweh.
Oh, then I don't remember.
The God who knows.
Oh, when to say enough.
When to say enough.
Yeah. Does it start with an R?
No, it's I believe it's El Shaddai.
Oh, just kidding. That was something else that I was saying. Never mind.
Gotcha. So it is.
I'm not feeling all that well. I don't know what's happening.
It is. So we get the story of God and His narrative, and He creates people. And what is the challenge that becomes of people? What is the biggest challenge to people? They corrupt some things. But it's because, like the Tower of Babel, what was the struggle there? They were trying to make a name for who?
For themselves.
For themselves. So every time we see people find a place to settle, they're trying to make a name for themselves. And they're just failing and failing and failing. And if you read through that narrative with that idea, then we see this introduction of this man named Abram. In the Hebrew, they would say it Avram. We say it Abram. And God calls him to this place to settle. And a couple weeks ago, we dealt with why. Why this particular guy? And there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. You should take a look back. But it's because this man wasn't about his own name. So as a recap of last week, in Genesis chapter 12, Abram is called out of the land of Haran to this place that God has called him. And who does he take with him?
He takes his wife and his servants and his animals. But the most important person is his nephew. What we would always say Lot, but in the Hebrew it's pronounced Lot.
Lot, yeah. So he takes Lot and Sarai and himself and his servants and everything that he has. And he leaves his father's house. Is this significant?
It is because of the traditional ways that they would do things.
So his dad's not dead, contrary to popular belief.
Right. If you just read it and don't think about what you're reading, then you think, okay, well, his dad has died and he moved on.
Terah is not dead now.
That's correct.
So here's Abram has left his father's house because he wasn't worried about his name. And what did we talk about was so significant about the things that he left behind when it came to his father's house? What are some significant things that he would have left behind when he left his dad's house?
Pretty much his whole livelihood.
His whole livelihood.
Like everything.
Yep. His safety net. What was the final thing that we wrote and we underlined?
The gods.
Gods. The gods of his family he would have left behind. And that was the call that God was making.
Right.
Leave all of those things.
Because he would have inherited everything.
Everything. Because he was the Behor. He was the oldest child.
Right.
And there's discussion about that. Figure that out for yourself. But the Jewish tradition and the midrash of the Hebraic. Anyway, the Jewish tradition is that Abram was the Behor. He was the oldest of Terah's kids. Yeah. That's how they would interpret that. So he finds his way into this place and he builds an altar to God made out of stones. And then there's a famine. He runs away. But he's got a plan.
She's my rescuer.
He's got a plan, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, he does. It feels very soap opera.
How did this soap opera work out?
Thank you so much. Well, I mean, it turned out to be great.
I mean, he got a lot of cool stuff.
But, I mean, it could have cost him his life.
Yes, but for a moment there, it cost him his wife, which, if you're negotiating, this is just a point of reference. If you're negotiating and the cost is your wife, you should renegotiate. That was a poor decision that you made. And that's where we see God, or that's where we see Abram. And then Abram, did he have a choice? In the negotiation, yeah, he could have not presented his wife as his sister and start negotiating a bride price for her. He could have done that. Well, once Pharaoh
how do you negotiate
gets involved,
with a Pharaoh?
Yeah. Well, her. Right. Right. So he gets a lot. He leaves
a very wealthy man.
He leaves a very wealthy man. And it says he has a lot of what?
Animals, I think.
Not only animals, but what else?
Gold and silver.
Gold and silver and servants. This is going to be significant. And then he and this guy named Lot, who he brought with him. What was the significance that we said? We said there was a significance to him bringing Lot with him, right? What did we say that significance was?
Well, we have to go back because to review, whenever he picked Sarai as his wife, they knew she was barren.
She's barren.
And so the importance of, especially the oldest son,
correct,
carrying on the family name and the family lineage, is huge.
Yeah.
And so for him to have chosen the barren wife and given the other one to his brother.
And the promise of God to make him a nation.
Yeah, and then God promises to make him a nation.
So he acts in faith by
taking his nephew.
By taking my nephew. Hey, God's going to carry on my name through my nephew.
Right.
Who I'm going to call my brother. And so they come back out of Egypt and are back in the land that God had promised to them. They're in this land of Canaan. And now they're doing what?
Yes. He and Lot are arguing.
And so...
And I don't know if it was the two of them. I think they were having more of a...
definitely their herdsmen. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You got it.
You said you didn't know if it was them. And
I was still talking.
Go ahead.
You got to let me. He doesn't like it that I don't talk. And then when I try to talk, he's like, I got this, and I'll talk for you.
Not true.
It is so true.
Anyway,
I don't know that he and Lot were necessarily arguing, but I think they were having a serious discussion about the quarrels among their herdsmen because something has to be done. They can't live life with their people fighting all the time.
Yeah, the land, it says that the land, they were so numerous and they had so much livestock that the land couldn't support them. That the land just couldn't support how much they had.
Right.
And so
somebody was going to have to leave.
it had to be from Lot's cattle and stuff had to come from like the abundance of
It was
Abram, I would imagine.
Well, okay, but also his father had died. So anything that would have been his father's inheritance would have gone to him, not his sisters.
But he didn't get that inheritance yet.
How do you know that?
He would have got whatever his father had, but
that's what I'm saying. His father
was still alive.
I know. I'm saying whatever his father had. And then I'm sure.
Yes, right. That's what I agreed. Whatever his father had,
right,
he would have gotten.
So he had something. It's not like he had
and
nothing.
Then that's a great question.
Does it say how long down the road?
Yeah, chapter 14 we get into. Yeah. It was a while, yeah. 205. He was 205. Let me look at my... Terah lived 70 years, and Abram left when he was 75, right? So it was 60 years between Abram leaving and Terah dying. No, we just know that it's before Avram's 99. Because, yeah. Sure sounds like. Right. Chapter 17 begins when Abram was 99 years old. I assume he shared his abundance with Lot, because he brought him along as the belief that that's my lineage.
So I'm sure he favored him.
So then, like we talked about last week, you would deal with a lot of disagreement with, hey, this is my lineage. This is the carrier of my name. And here's, people will argue, nah, that's not what's going on here. But we're going to get to that. So then he acts in the character of a man that he is and isn't concerned with his own name.
Yet again.
And he says, all right, let's not fight. Let's not quarrel. Let's not cause division. We're brothers, which he's really not, but he is. But he's not. Okay. And so he says, you choose whatever you want, and I'll go the other way.
So he chooses, and everybody's happy, and he's apart from Avram, whatever. And then what happens?
Then they go to war, but not Abram. There's 5 kings against 4 kings, and one of those kings that loses is the king of Sodom.
Or Sodom. Yeah.
Which is where
Lot
is.
Lives.
So Abram gathers up 318 trained men out of his household, which...
That's a lot of people. I feel like I'm a little overwhelmed having 5 people outside of myself in our home. I cannot imagine having 318 more.
So they take these 318 and they go win.
Win, W-I-N?
W-I-N.
Oh, you're asking me a question. I'm like, I don't know. The next day?
They go get the they get the victory royale.
Yes.
That's a Fortnite reference. So they get the victory royale. And they're on their way back, and Abram meets the king of Sodom and this king of Salem, who wasn't even involved in the interaction here. This man named Melchizedek. And I have always thought of that story as it just being Abram and Melchizedek, but it's not. the king of Sodom, is there as well. And Abram gives 10% of everything that he has, and he is the victor over everything. And the king of Sodom says, well, just give me the people. Keep everything else for yourself. And Abram again responds as a man of character who says, this isn't about me. And says, I'm not taking anything.
Yeah, my men can have what is their share.
These 3 guys get their share.
What 3 guys?
It says 3. He names 3 specifically.
Where is this?
Verse 24, I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. Yeah. He specifically lists 3 people.
Well, all right. Maybe he knew those 3 people would take care of the other people.
And that's
Not that it matters, but.
And it doesn't say it specifically, but we know from what we see later on, a story that we're actually going to skip along the way and then come back to. It doesn't say, but he lets Lot go again. He lets this man who he has lived these years with the belief, and he's carried him along, and he has brought him along, and he has taken care of him, and he has had him in his household for all of this time, because that was going to be the lineage. He lets him go again. And you're like, well, Pastor Kirk, I just disagree with that's why he brought Lot along.
Oh, I don't think that. I don't disagree with you.
Well, let's pick up the story in Genesis 15. Do you want to read, or would you like for me to read? Go ahead. He's going to ask a question here. So make an observation. Yeah, chapter 13. After he lets Lot go. God visits him. Yeah.
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 He's saying that I think God's reassuring Abram.
Have you ever
got you?
Have you ever been reassured of something and still dealt with the emotions of that's just not true?
I'm pretty sure I've done that once a week.
I just can't do this. This is a crazy thing. Well, would you like to read? Or would you like for me to read?
Oh, let me read because you're going to talk a lot.
Go ahead. Genesis 15, verse 1.
Do I only get to read verse 1?
Nah, just start there.
He doesn't stop me after verse 2. You just watch him. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was
Where are you?
That's, well, I turned back to 13.
Chapter 15.
I'm like, why is Lot with him again?
Chapter
well, okay,
15.
but if you look, I turned back to see what he was talking about.
Okay.
And my 15 and my 13 are in the same area. I just didn't.
Gotcha.
Like, I thought he just let him go.
Wow. I am looking at the Bible, and I don't see Lot's name here.
And we have 2 different translations, but they can't be.
Yeah.
Did.
All right.
Okay.
Let's actually do chapter 15 this time.
Okay.
Let's go ahead.
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Was this better?
Yeah.
Saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward.
So, I'm going to ask. I let you get through
verse 1. Yeah.
What's God doing here? What's happening?
Reassuring him.
He's reassuring him. He is encouraging him. And the question is, after this victory that he has just won, what in the world does God have to reassure Abram of?
His offspring.
His offspring.
Okay, because a lot of times whenever the Lord appears or an angel of the Lord appears, they say, do not be afraid. And it's meaning, don't fear of me.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of me. So when I read that, I'm like, oh, okay, of course he's not going to be afraid of you. But that's not what he's meaning. And Avram knows that. by his response.
Basically, in this story, we can almost feel Abram having this conversation and gathering all these things and releasing everybody and everything to go back with the king of Sodom, back towards Sodom. And he's watching Lot go off into the distance thinking, I'm a fool.
And it's like God just taps him on the shoulder.
Watching my legacy walk away. And yeah, God's like tapping him on the shoulder. Hey, I'm still here with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. But
Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus?
So
Eleazar is his servant.
It's the chief servant in his household. So think about this. We've been saying for 2 chapters or 3 chapters, Abram brought Lot along because that was what he believed was his lineage. And up until this point, we have had no direct indication that is actually how Abram feels.
Right.
But this is the place where the second time he's letting Lot go, he is clearly communicating to God. Yeah. I am here all alone. Me and my barren wife and a whole bunch of servants, and there's nobody here left to carry on my name. This guy who doesn't even know you, doesn't know anything about you, that's from Damascus, who's been with me in my house, that's who's going to carry on my lineage.
Yeah. Then Abram said, Look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying,
I want to stop real quick before we get there.
Okay.
What did we say? Because we've encountered this. Something is said, and then there's without anybody else saying anything, and this person said this. What does that indicate?
Time has passed.
Time has passed. So Abram, God says to Abram, I'm your shield, I'm your great reward, just trust me, don't be afraid. And he's like,
Lord God.
Sovereign Lord,
yeah.
I'm childless, and Eleazar of Damascus is going to be my heir. And what does God say in response?
Nothing.
Not a thing. How long passed between the 2 conversations? I don't know. But long enough for Abram to be frustrated with the silence.
Look.
Because he gets even more, like, somebody is like, they make a statement and then that statement escalates as the emotion escalates.
Sure.
I feel like that's where Abram is in this statement. Because he doesn't even recognize the name of Eleazar in the second statement. He's just said, a servant in my house.
Somebody born in my house.
Somebody who just happened to be born in my house. That's who's going to carry on my lineage.
Yeah.
This is great.
Look.
This kind of feels like the Elijah moment where he's like, listen, why don't you just eat something and take a nap?
And a nap, and everything will be fine.
Stop stressing out. I mean, you look tired. You've been to war. You've given up this stuff. Why don't you just relax for a minute? So, okay.
And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, so God's going to respond now.
Now God's going to respond.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great response, too.
This one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, Look now toward heaven, and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness.
Now, okay. This is oftentimes where we like to stop the story, and we're like, man, see how much faith Abram had?
But the conversation continues.
But the conversation doesn't stop. And it escalates even more.
Because at this point, we're going back and forth. Well, at least as far as the characters are concerned. So God says to him, so shall your descendants be. And then he believed in the Lord.
Yes.
Abram. He counted it to him for righteousness. And then he said to him, so we're back to the Lord again.
And God is clearly leaving out some details in this story, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He's like, Eleazar's not going to be your heir. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
He still hasn't clarified how's this going to work because my wife is still barren.
Right. And because he says it'll come from your own body.
It's going to come from you. Oh, great.
Thanks.
You ever been given a little bit of information about a problem that you're facing and use that little bit of information to really mess things up?
To create a whole scenario that was not real?
Just mess it all up?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we all have experience with this, yes? Yeah. Abram is going to wreck this story and make crazy
in a little
mistakes
bit, but let's talk about how
out of this little bit of information that God gave him. Anyway, go ahead.
So then he said, he being the Lord, said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to of the Chaldeans, there we go, to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Abram says, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So God said to him.
So hold on. What is Abram asking for?
A covenant.
He's not asking for a covenant.
A sign.
He's asking for a sign. Show me, give me something. Because, again, just 2 verses before this, the statement is, Abram believed the word of the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness.
And
2 verses later, Abram's like, what sign are you going to give me? What evidence are you going to give me that I can run back to?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. Avram's he is losing his place.
What do you mean?
Because a person who is weak is demanded of the suzerain vassal covenant. You remember that conversation? The suzerain is the person of strength. The vassal is the person of weakness. I believe that's right. The person who is in a place of weakness, it's the person who's in a place of strength that says to the person of a place of weakness, what sign are you going to give me? What sign are you going to provide to remind me that this is the covenant? So Abram in this statement is forgetting his place. He has this, in the Jewish term, they would call it chutzpah. Like he has this gusto about him. The problem is that gusto has got him into a place where he's having a discussion with somebody who he has forgotten the roles.
Right. And you're right. The suzerain is the king and the vassal is the weak one.
And so Abram, much like many of us do in our prayer life from time to time, are like, God, you're going to have to give me a sign to remind me that this is going on. And the problem is, God doesn't have to provide squat.
Right.
Because he is not the person of weakness, and he will never be in any relationship or conversation. So much like hey, my wife is on the market, and Pharaoh ends up being the one that says, hey, I like your wife, she's my wife now. Abram comes into this, finally gets to this frustrated point where he's like, all right, this is what's going to happen. You're going to give me a sign, and it's going to prove what's going on. I feel like
your mic went out.
That's awesome.
Here.
So Abram says, you're going to give me a sign. And the challenge is God is never the vassal. He's never the secondary one. I got to get rid of this. Say what? Am I back on? Okay, my battery is definitely dead or dying. 2 AA batteries.
Don't worry about it. We can always do a different microphone.
Okay. So, and do you want to turn the effects off of that? It just says effects. Okay. So God So now Avram is putting himself in a place of that can be compromising. Because the last thing you want to do is try to tell God that he owes you something. Because the reality is God doesn't owe us anything. Nothing at all.
That's right.
So go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know where I am now.
Verse 9.
Well, so Abram says, Lord God, how? Now it's like nothing. How shall I know that I will inherit it? So the Lord says to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat,
Yeah.
a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon.
Yeah. It's interesting.
One verse at a time.
We go ahead if you want to keep going. It's fine because yeah. Go ahead, read verse 10 and 11.
Then he brought all these to him and cut them in two, down the middle, and placed each piece opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Avram drove them away.
That's a half of the thing. That's kind of the bird. I don't know. I'm really bad at this. Anyway, a couple of questions I have about this. Oh, those are great birds.
Well, I mean, it's representation.
Couple of questions. How did Avram know to cut the animals in two? How did Avram know?
You mean to just split them down the middle like this?
Yeah, what God was asking. How did God know what, or how did Avram know what God was asking?
I don't know. I feel like, well, I mean, a sacrifice is a sacrifice, right?
No.
Or no?
No.
I don't know. How did he know?
Okay, it's really cool. There's so much weight to what's going on here. And it really, really, really is important as we get into the book of Exodus, this particular thing. Because this would be this is a covenant. And this would be, in their culture, would have been very, very normal. But this is the expression of a bride price covenant. So
that's right.
This, and if you want to get the real picture, this is the picture. If this is the earth, there would be a natural valley, and he would cut those in two and lay them on that valley so that they're sloped down, so that the blood, as it drains out of these animals, would come together in this valley and create a path. Now, here's what would typically happen in this, what they would call a blood path covenant or a marriage covenant. I love we really, 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 really should examine this as a marriage covenant.
So he would have done this with his marriage to Sarai.
Correct.
Interesting.
And the person who steps in the blood first to make declarations is the vassal, is the lesser one. It would be the potential future husband. It would be the potential groom. And this groom would be dressed in white, and he would stomp through the blood and splash it and declare what his intentions are. And then the suzerain, the stronger one, the greater one, the father of the bride, then would walk through the same. And the implication would be, I am going to do this, and if I don't, you can do this with my blood. So here's what's interesting. Avram lays this out
for a covenant between him and God, for a sign and a covenant. He's going to enter into a covenant and agreement between him and God for the promise that God has made to him. So who goes first?
Should be Abram.
Should be Abram. Why doesn't he?
He goes to sleep.
You mean he prepared this and was like, man, I'm tired, I'm taking a nap?
That's what it says.
No, that's not what it says. Read it again.
Well, I haven't read that part yet.
Yeah, you
Deep.
have. Nope. Before the deep sleep, what happens?
The vultures came down and Abram drove them away.
What indication does that give us? Are vultures just randomly around all the time?
Well, they were dead.
How long does it take for a vulture to show up? They're just there instantly? Something dies and vultures are immediately there?
I don't know. I don't know their schedule, but probably not.
You probably haven't checked their schedule. No. So if we read this...
we did have a dead cow one time, and it took probably a week before a vulture was, on it.
Okay.
Like a real vulture. We had other birds, but
so
real vulture.
Abram has prepared everything for this blood path covenant, and the blood is draining down and filling up this valley, and he gets scared.
Of vultures?
Nope, he's not scared of vultures. He's scared of God. Because he knows as soon as he steps foot in that blood, he has nothing to offer. This is what's going to happen over and over and over again.
Well, how do you know he's scared?
Because he waits.
Vultures were coming.
Eventually. Not immediately.
So you're saying there's some time that passes.
There's quite a bit amount of time that passes between.
Okay. Hi, I read it as a Westerner, and I was all like, well, when the vultures came down, he scared them away.
Yeah.
No, there was some time, most likely.
The passage of time. Okay, we're going to move on.
Oh, man.
So time, there has been some time going on here.
Okay, so you're telling me, I thought you were trying to get me to see that God sent the vulture so it sent him away. But
nope.
You're telling me that some significant, because I was all like, well, a week, at least.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's been a while.
I'm tracking with you now. Wow.
So Abram, as the vassal in this covenant, he's not stepped into the blood because he's got nothing to offer. How are you going to treat me? I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
How are you going to treat my bride? I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I offered her up as my sister last time I was in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? So he's scared. And God's going to do something that is absolutely in line with his character. And if we recognize this as a marriage covenant, it is so powerful what happens next. Because God is going to say, I know you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You can't meet the standard, so I'm going to provide for myself.
Wow.
And if we recognize this covenant as a marriage covenant, we know that Abram couldn't step into that blood because he does not represent the groom.
Right.
Even though he is a man, he is not the groom in this covenant. He's the bride.
Because he's
the image of the bride.
Yeah.
So he has nothing to offer. He's scared because he knows he has gotten himself into a situation where he's run off at the mouth and asked God for something that he can't fulfill, because he's put himself in a place where he's like, now I'm going to sit and wait because, God, you're the lesser. But God's not the lesser. So he has to keep waiting, and he runs off the birds, and then what happens?
After some time had passed, when the vultures came down, I got it now. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
So think about this for just a second. God puts him into a deep sleep, terrifies him,
Yeah.
gives him nightmares.
Tells him all about how his,
For some reason, throws
People.
in information about his offspring.
which is
It's completely out of place.
very out of place, foreshadowing, we call
But then the sun sets, and a pot and this cloud, right?
that. No.
A blazing torch and a smoking fire pot.
Yeah.
What in the world is going on here?
He's being representative of two things.
What without a doubt throughout all of Scripture is represented by fire and cloud?
God.
The presence of God.
That's what I'm saying. He's a double representation.
He's a double representation. So not
At the
only-
same time.
at the
Because
same time,
most
yes.
of the time it's fire by night and a cloud by day.
And
the
in the
smoke by day.
evening, after the sun sets, he says, I'm fulfilling both sides. I'm not only going to be the groom, but I am going to be the father of the bride.
Yeah.
I'm both. I'm going to fulfill both.
It's a big deal.
It's so powerful what goes on there. It's interesting, too, though, that he references that his people would be in slavery, but he doesn't tell them where it's going to be, but that he would judge the people.
That they enslaved them
And it's like this thing that keeps on coming back, that it's pretty easy. God is really good and really capable and can do all things, and it is really easy for God to get his people out of Egypt and out of slavery, because he got, right. God's really good and really capable at getting his people out of Egypt. It's the whole getting Egypt out of his people thing that becomes a challenge.
right. Which is why he started with that important thing that you underlined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me again what Avram and Sarai left Egypt with.
Nothing.
They left Egypt with nothing?
Oh, Egypt. I thought you meant the father. A lot.
A lot.
But the most I feel like they left with was servants.
Okay.
What do servants have?
Servants had their own gods.
They did.
It's pretty impressive too. And it's crazy because God gave Avram what piece of information in the whole covenant? Hey, just relax and trust me conversation. What did he tell him? It'll come from you. And
Yeah.
what does Avram do next? He does what every married man does. No, he doesn't listen to his wife. He goes and tells his wife, hey, guess what happened today at work? Yeah.
Today. Guess
Hey,
what happened the last 3 weeks while
I
I
got
haven't been around because I've been
terrified.
with dead carcasses?
Yes.
Guess what happened?
Let me tell you what happened while I was out. Tells her this whole story.
And she says,
And she's like, hey, I've got a great idea. It is going to come from you. Our offspring is going to come from you. But my chief handmaiden,
yeah,
who's from where?
Egypt.
Egypt. So this Egyptian woman who God has given us, why don't you sleep with her and see if that produces a baby? I'll raise him as my own. That will be how God does this. That didn't last long.
But how often, when God gives us a promise and then we manipulate it, does it turn out the way that God had intended?
So we always read the story of like how they sent her away eventually. But in Genesis 16, Sarai is hateful and harsh to Hagar. And Hagar runs away. And it's the angel of the Lord that finds her and says, hey, stop running. Go back home. And she's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And it's like she's negotiating with God. And we always reference this, the Lord sees, El Roi, the Lord sees me. But she says, I'm not going back. Until finally, the angel of the Lord blesses her and tells her her son is going to be blessed and have many offspring and nations and all these things. And then she says, now the Lord has seen me. What? Are you missing it?
Well, Jonas said, yeah, we are. Well, the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. In verse 10, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so they shall not be counted for multitude. The Lord didn't bless her, the angel did.
Yeah. And then what happened? She didn't respond.
Right.
And then
the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees. For she said, I also here seen him who sees me. Therefore the well was called Be'er Lahai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael.
And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. So he was less than 86. It was less than 11 years.
From the time he left?
From Egypt to now.
Was he 75 when he left Egypt, it said? Okay.
He was 75 when he left Haran.
What is Haran?
Haran.
Got it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
So Terah's definitely still alive. So this is going well. So here we go. As the world turns.
Right. That's why I said it feels so much more like a soap opera.
Like, we've gone from now Avram has an offspring. And this is the place I really wanted to get to. Because this blood path covenant was really important because of the commitment and Avram realizing that he couldn't do it. He couldn't step into that blood. But then he took some of the information that God had given him leading into that, and he goes and talks to his wife, and his wife talks him into sleeping with her handmaiden, and then wife starts treating handmaiden poorly. It's like when you include somebody else in your sex life that isn't your wife, that things don't go well. It's a shock. I know.
I can't imagine why jealousies would come in. Right.
Can't imagine why. Like, there's, soap operas, crazy talk, crazy stuff going on. Anyway, all kinds of bad stuff going on. And then On top of that, woman that wife told the husband to sleep with actually has a kid. They name him Ishmael. But then something else happens. And it's like God tells Abram, no. What you're doing, trying to manipulate this, is not okay.
Oh, so you're talking about in 17.
So we're going to read chapter 17, verses 1 through 19, and we're going to talk through this. So I'm going to let you read all of that.
Okay. We shall see. All right.
And go ahead.
Chapter 17, verse 1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Avraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you and their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said to Abraham, As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. I'm getting tickled because I know what you're going to say. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money must be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Then God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her, and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And then Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said, No, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him.
So, what's God doing?
I feel like he's repeating himself a lot.
Is he going to make a covenant?
I don't know.
Is there a covenant?
I don't know if there's going to be a covenant between you and your descendants, and
between you and me and your descendants,
and your descendants and me and you.
There's this covenant. And I'm going to make a covenant.
That's why I was getting so tickled.
Have we encountered another story about this covenant that I'm going to make with you and this covenant?
And Noah.
There's a lot of covenant.
You and me and Noah.
And Noah and your descendants.
Covenant.
So Noah. So we're going to talk about these parallel stories here for just a second. So far, the covenants that God has made with his people, who has provided the sign of the covenant?
Only God.
Only God.
Yeah.
Only God has provided the sign of his covenant. And in that Noah story, where he says, hey, I'm going to make a covenant. There's this covenant that's going to be between me and you. Between you and me, there's going to be this covenant. And between you, on and on and on and on, there's this overwhelming, hey, there's going to be a covenant. Yeah. What comes after that covenant, literally?
No, we talked about it, and I don't remember what you told me.
There's a word for this literary thing that happens.
Oh. Dad, what is it?
Bill?
You've said it every week. Right?
After that covenant, there is, or in the middle of that covenant, there is a
Is it a chiasm?
There's a chiasm.
I couldn't think of the word for a minute.
So potentially here, we have this covenant that's going on, and we're looking for the focus of this covenant going on, and potentially maybe there's something here that points us in the direction of the focus of what this covenant is. So do you want to take a stab at where the bookend of the first bookend of the covenant is? Because it says something at the back end of this chiasm that's pretty easy to spot as you read it, because it tells you that Abram does something again that he already did.
Yeah, he fell down.
He fell on his face. You're like, well, okay, but at the beginning of the story, didn't he fall down on his face already?
Yeah. Lots of foliage.
Well, he's like being slain in the spirit multiple times. He like fell down on his face because God showed up, and then it's like God's talking, so he has to stand up to listen to him, and then God turns and looks back at him, and he falls back down on his face or something.
Yeah, so verse 3, he falls down, and then verse 17, he falls down.
So there's our bookends. Okay. So the next thing along the way, no longer will you be called Abram, your name shall be called Avraham. Anything else similar to that? For I have made you a father of many nations.
Right. Sarai will be Sarah, and I will bless her and give you a son by her. Bless her, she will be mother of nations.
Mother of nations, all right. So then the next thing we see in verse 7, this statement, everlasting covenant.
And then in verse 13, my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant.
All right. And then in verse 8, the whole land of Canaan where you now reside as a foreigner.
And in verse 12, bought with money from any foreigner who's not your descendant.
All right. And then verse 9, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come.
And in verse 10, between me and you and your descendants after you.
No.
Yes.
Try verse 12, for the generations to come.
Oh, well, hold on. Let me go back. Oh, it's, the beginning of verse 12.
For the beginning of verse 12, for the generations to come. So there's still a center
in mine it doesn't say it that way, sorry.
So there's a center somewhere between verse 10 and 11. And at the end of verse 10 is the center of this chiasm.
Every male child among you shall be circumcised.
Every male among you shall be circumcised. God is giving. Here's the thing about when God gives you this suzerain covenant. Suzerain vassal covenant, right?
Suzerain vassal.
Right. The vassal has to be able to present the sign of the covenant at all times. Or the suzerain doesn't have to remember the covenant at all. Okay?
It's so tickled. But
so, with Noah, God gives him a sign, and he says, I'm going to provide it.
I'll care of it.
I'll put it in the clouds. You can't lose it. Can't lose it. Your rainbow. Here he says, I got you. We're going to give you, you're going to have a sign of the covenant, and the covenant is going to be an activity that up until this time has only been used for cleanliness and the identification of priesthood in Egypt. Circumcision, up till this point in the ancient culture, what sets the Jewish people apart is this specific thing. And when God says you are going to be a nation of priests, this is the identification, because in the Egyptian culture is the only culture that predates this with circumcision, and it was an act of cleanliness
for priests,
for priesthood in Egypt. Only thing that predates this.
It's so good of God to give.
So it's significant. And
something that you can't lose.
Yeah, secondly, it is a sign that you cannot lose. If you misplace this particular thing, you have many, many more problems.
then, well, yeah.
So the mark of circumcision is this image of this covenant with God, and he says, okay, I will give you a sign for you to hold on to, for you to have close at hand at all times.
I can't. I gotta
that
stop.
you cannot give up on, that you cannot misplace,
But I mean, how genius is that?
so that you can have
Honestly.
it forever, and it will recognize you as my nation of priests.
Right.
And so it's so powerful that God is intentionally.
And it makes me think about like the foreknowledge, because God obviously is omnipotent.
Yeah.
That's all knowing, right? Omnipotent, omniscient, whatever it is.
All powerful would be omnipotent.
Okay, well, all knowing. But in the creation of man, he made that so that the body could withstand a covenant later. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, our body is designed.
I mean, it's not like he was like, oh, we'll just cut your pinky off. You don't need that.
Yeah.
But you do. I mean, you can live without it, I guess, but
yeah.
That wasn't, I just think that's pretty interesting.
This is the image that we should take from this. Is that God, through his understanding, committed to his people a sign of a covenant that they couldn't misplace, that they couldn't just forget somewhere.
Smirked.
You can't leave this thing behind. It's with you all the time. And you're going to carry it as a sign that you're mine.
Right.
That you're different from everybody else. And that is the call of God.
Yep.
That's the heart of God. Yeah. That God has put himself in a place to fulfill the covenant, not only of the groom, but as the father of the bride. And he has called us as his bride to take a covenant and to receive the commitment of God that all people through us are blessed by taking on a sign of his covenant that cannot be misplaced, that cannot go away. And so the call of God is to walk out the covenant. And the important part about Scripture that I love is it doesn't leave out those details where we take a little bit of the information, and if we're not careful, we lead it in a direction that is destructive to us and derails the story that God has to correct. But God always meets us where we are and provides more than enough. So we're going to jump into some small group time and talk through and discuss a few more things. We encourage you to come and join us. We're going to be continuing on Sunday morning at 10:30 our What About Love series. And we look forward to it. Come and join us.